Hello, my name is Shruthi Rajasekar and I'm a composer and vocalist. If you're new to vocal writing, there are two things I would absolutely recommend you do at the outset. The first is to find the vocal music that you love. This might be something from your childhood, songs you sang with your family, but this could also be something you've encountered on YouTube. But find that music, listen to as much of it as you can, just completely immerse yourself in the style and do research about where it comes from, why these people sing this way, and also talk to a practitioner. That's the very best thing you can do, so you can learn about their vocal technique and what it is that they're doing. If it's from a cultural context that you're not connected with or familiar with, it's really, really important that you do this research and do it diligently. The second thing I would recommend is that you start singing, especially if this is something that makes you uncomfortable. I know that this can be a hard thing to do if you're not used to it, but as a creative person, you will find that this will release your inhibitions once you no longer expect yourself to perform at an impossible standard, but just simply to use this instrument and use it just to sing and have fun. If you have a physical limitation that prevents you from vocalizing, you can still get into the mentality of the singer, which is really what we're trying to do here by audiating. And this is a term I'll talk about a little bit more in a minute. But the important thing is when you start to sing, and maybe in the style that you're asking your singers to access, you will also learn more about what that experience is like, and you'll be able to help them as they journey in that too. So either way, it's going to be a win-win for you once you start singing. So if you're doing SATB music, let's talk about what that even means. SATB is soprano, alto, tenor, and bass. These are the classifications we use in Western classical music to divvy up the range of the human voice, basically. Soprano is on top, bass is at the bottom. And if you're going to a choir that has this configuration, that might mean you're bringing the music that's notated in a Western classical notation system, and you're maybe generally accessing the bel canto technique of singing or some variation of that. These are some parameters that you can think of if you're going in with that thinking. Even if you're bringing them a different vocal style, you might be presenting it to them in the terms that they know. So first, range. This is really, really important. Here is the range that you can almost definitely use with just about every choir. I've been a bit conservative with this, and you can probably go a semitone to 3 semitones above and below this, depending on your singers. But it's really, really good for you to start with this and use this first before you want to widen, or if you know that your singers can do a certain thing, that will be different. Like, it depends on the age of the singers, the age of the instrument basically, and the experience that they have. So better to be safe than sorry. It's important to note that not all notes are equal, and if you're used to composing at the piano, this might be new for you to realize that a chord in one particular key will sound very different if it's 2 semitones above in voices, just simply because of where it sits in the range. So think about that too. You want to make sure that it's comfortable for everyone. Generally, if it's mid-range for everybody, it's going to be comfortable and it's going to be almost neutral. You can use any kind of vowel. But if you're in the upper extremities of the voice, you're going to find that the dynamics are going to be generally louder, so it's going to be hard, for example, for a soprano to sing top A. By that I mean an A5, an octave and a half above middle C. You're going to find it's difficult for them to sing that pianissimo generally. You might have singers who are able to do it, but on the whole, that's going to be something that they want to probably be at least a mezzo piano, probably mezzo forte or forte fortissimo. So now, I just mentioned vowels. What I mean by that is the configuration that your bel canto singers might be using. So if that's new for you, maybe think about the Latin vowels, the basic pure vowels, a, e, o, and u, which might just sound like a Latin version of English vowels, and you would be correct in thinking that. So the thing with these vowels is to think about the aperture, how open or closed they are. And you'll find that the more open ones, something like ah, are going to be quite useful for the upper and lower extremities if it's tenors and basses, and upper extremities of the range if it's sopranos and altos. Whereas an oo would be quite difficult for them to do at the top of the range, sopranos and altos, same with tenors and basses, the oo. Similar thing to that is humming, or sounds. That's going to be really tricky at the top as well. So don't write top B for your sopranos on a closed M. That's just going to be hard for them to do. Now, I mentioned pure vowels. The air quotes are because I just think that's a funny way to distinguish things, because the corrupt vowels, which we might think of as the diphthong experience, are delicious for composers to use. Diphthong is basically when you have the vowel moving, two vowels basically, or you're moving through the vowel. So think of the word I, just letter I. You're moving through a lot of different things in that particular one. So you can experiment with that and think about it, but only if you really put it in your own voice will you get to understand what that experience is like to sing an I. If you are not familiar with separating consonants and vowels and never have really thought about consonants specifically before, I would really encourage you to look up IPA. This is the International Phonetic Alphabet, and if you Google image that, you'll find basically the same chart everywhere that has the English and non-English sounds classified by where they are and how you make them. Super useful way to think about this vocal technique of consonants. The main thing to know at the outset is that there is a difference between voiced and unvoiced consonants, we call them. So let's take a fricative, like v. V is the pitched version. That means it's voiced. You can pitch it. You can put it on a note. But f is not really going to have a specific note in the way that we think of pitch. So that can be a lovely thing to play with, those different sounds. And, you know, breaking down words into their components is a huge part of contemporary choral music. So think about the sounds that you're using. So when you're thinking about what the singer is looking at, a huge part of SATB music is the fact that they see the full score. It's not like an orchestral part where they only get to see what they're doing. They can see the vertical and the horizontal. This is all the more reason that you should give your parts, particularly your inner alto and tenor parts, interesting stuff, because they can see what you've given to the other parts. So they're going to like you a lot more if you've given everybody interesting things to do in their horizontal line. I mentioned the term audiate before. What this term refers to is the experience of sight singing. Again, if you are practicing your singing, you will get to put yourself in the shoes of audiating and realize that it's actually a pretty hard thing. When you put something in front of a singer, they're not just, you know, pressing a note right here and then getting a F sharp. You know, they have to mentally figure out where that sound is and then sing it. And that's what we mean by the term audiating. And it's something that I believe oral singers are doing as well too, because they are imagining what that sounds like and then they sing it. In the case of sight reading music, you see something written down and then you have to translate those intervals, that phrase, and however you're thinking of it into an actual sound. So this doesn't have to do with the starting pitch. They might get that from somewhere else, a piano, or they might practice and memorize it, or they might hear it in the choir somewhere else, but it's what they do after they get the starting pitch. So that experience of audiating, it's a tough thing to do, and only if you really put yourself through that will you get it. I talked about singing before, and it's important for you to just generally start singing, start humming around the house, let yourself be free in that way. But something that I always do is I go through the pieces I've written. As I'm writing, I tend to use my voice as a tool. That's just me. But something I insist on doing with myself after is going through the music and singing it all after it's written. And I, more often than not, find things that I didn't even know were in there. So that sometimes helps me edit, but also it just sometimes helps me appreciate what are all the intricacies of what's going on. So I really, really encourage you to put yourself in the experience of singing it, and so you can just see how your singers might be feeling. This is really important when you think about the length of a phrase. For example, singers don't usually practice circular breathing, which is something you might be familiar with other, wind instruments. So they can't sing endlessly. There is a great technique called stagger breathing, which is where basically within an ensemble of singers, if you've got more than one singer on a part, you might have them holding for several bars and they'll rotate in and out and listen to the people around them and do that. And it's a really, really great thing. It's because singers are such great ensemble musicians. But it's a lot to ask somebody to do that, say, for the whole piece, and maybe not necessarily satisfying either. Because when you're staggered breathing, you're not necessarily thinking about the line or the shape of the phrase. You're just trying to keep something constant. So I think it's important. I mean, this is, again, gets back to, if you sing things through, you'll notice just how long your phrases really are. And that doesn't mean that you have to change them because of that, but you'll just be aware of it. Which brings me to my final point. I've talked about all these different things, range, the tessitura of where the notes are sitting, the vowels, then the humming that you're asking them to do, maybe the different consonants you can use, the experience of having an interesting horizontal line against the vertical parts, and what it means to audiate all of these notes. But ultimately, if you want to do something that breaks with these, that's completely your prerogative. That's your creative license that you have. The important thing is that you just continue to recall what is the experience of singing it. For myself, the way I justify sort of breaking with these trends and maybe asking them to do something that's a bit difficult is that I want some reason for it. Maybe some rhetorical purpose. The story that I'm telling, the text I'm using, really calls for something that might be vocally challenging. Or I want them to be challenged in that moment. I want it to be difficult for them because that's something I'm conveying. Or I just really, really want that sound. But there has to be a reason for it for myself. That's a parameter I use, because if I can't justify why I'm doing it, it's kind of hard for me to then justify other people, justify their reason for doing it and for helping me out in that way. So again, just remember that this is a very human instrument, and singers want to feel when they perform. This is maybe the biggest takeaway you can take, is that the voice is an incredibly expressive instrument, so versatile, and you can do so many things with it, but singers are ultimately trained in general to convey something with it. Not necessarily that they have to sing a text, but they're telling some kind of story or message. Even if that story or message is that there is no story or message, that's still them expressing something. So let them have that. Let them have that human connection and facilitate that as best as you can.